In this lab, we're going to take the RU Academy website and create drop-down menus for several of the main navigation links. The RU Academy drop-downs are going to be a little different from the drop-downs that we built in the previous exercises. It's been pretty common when we do a lab that you're building something that's almost exactly or identical to what you were building in the previous exercises. And in this lab, I wanted to stretch you a little bit. I wanted to take you a little outside of your comfort zone and say, okay, you know the techniques. Now let's see if you can make them work in a slightly different way. So let me show you what I mean. In the RU Academy website, when I start to mouse over these top-level items, you'll notice that we have drop-down menus for several of these that show up. But instead of showing up as a vertical menu like we did in our exercises, these are showing up just like another horizontal menu. They're just sort of underneath that. There's a little bit more to these, and let me show you what I mean. If I click on, say, the Programs page to go to the Programs, here are all the options in the Programs menu submenu. But when I mouse off of it, it doesn't go away. It persists, which is perfect. That's exactly what I want, because if somebody's within the program section, I want them to be able to go up and see what their options are. However, notice that these menus are semi-translucent. So if the other submenus were to lay on top of this, that would be a problem. You'd have a hard time reading these. So notice that as soon as you go up to the menu bar and start mousing around, the other sub-navigation menus come up. But when you leave the navigation bar, the appropriate pages sub-navigation comes back and persists. All this is being done with CSS and without JavaScript. As far as the positioning of the menus go, as far as this nice subtle animation that we have that fades these in, you're going to be in control of all of those things. Now, in terms of these menus persisting on their section pages, I'm just going to talk about that a little bit when we get into the solution of the movie. So let's jump in and take a look at our lab instructions. Now, I have the index.html file as well as the main.css file open from the 05_09 directory. And remember that the main.css file is actually in the _CSS directory. We've got a few steps here. The first thing that the steps are telling you to do is what we just did. Basically, open the finished file, preview it in the browser, play around with the menus for a while, get an understanding of how they're positioned, what they look like, what kind of transitions are involved, so that you've got a better idea of what you're going to need to do in terms of styling. And then the next thing I'm asking you to do is to take a look at the HTML of the site's pages and really become familiar with how the submenus are structured and how classes are assigned. We're going to take a look at that once we go through all the steps. Here are the lab steps. I'm just going to browse through these. First thing you want to do is scroll down in the main CSS file and find the drop-down menu styles. They're around line 252 or so, depending upon which code editor you might be using. I need you to write a selector that's going to target the submenus. I'm not telling you what selector to write. You're going to have to figure out exactly how to target those submenus based on the structure of the HTML. If you want to, you can use the surrounding selectors to kind of give you a hint. Here's what I need you to do within that selector. You need to turn floating off. You need to set the background to this semi-transparent white color, and I have provided you with that value. Figure out how wide the submenu needs to be based on where it's going to be located, and then assign that value. Set its height to auto so that the contents are actually controlling the height of the submenus. And then I want you to use positioning to start the submenu way off the page. I've given you negative 9,000 pixels, but you can choose whatever you want to. And then bring it back to 45 pixels from the top of the parent nav element. You should also disable any margins. The next thing you're going to do after that is you're going to use the structure of the top level menu and the submenus. You're going to use that structure to write a selector that repositions the submenu to align with the nav element when the submenu's top level menu item is hovered over. So you'll need to write that selector and you'll need to trigger that. Then, using opacity, fade in the submenu as they're triggered. And I want that to animate. You want to fade those submenus in as they're triggered with the top level menu items. Inside the submenus themselves, that default rollover color for links of orange is very hard to read against that white background. So I'm going to change it to one of the other site's other colors, which is sort of a darker lavender color. And I've given you that color right there. So you're going to go into the submenus and change that rollover color for the submenus themselves. The last thing I want you to do is just sort of observe, test those drop-down menus, and take a look at what I was talking about earlier. When you navigate to one of the sectional pages that has a set of submenu links, that submenu is going to persist until you hover over the nav bar again. Try to figure out how that's done. Read through the CSS, locate the selectors that are controlling that. And then I want you to really think about how that's structured and the approach to that. I want you to really think about those selectors and say to yourself, is there a more efficient way to do this without using JavaScript? One last thing that I wanted to do, I'm going to go over the source code of index.html. And I want to show you how these menus are structured. At the very top of everything is a nav element with an ID of page nav. It has a class of CF, which is just clearing it. So you're not necessarily going to use that to identify anything. And the ARIA role of navigation. The top level unordered list has a class of top menu. So very similar to what we were doing earlier. And then all the submenus also have that class of submenu as well. Something that's very important, it's not really going to have any bearing on the way you write your styles, but for that last step where you're going in and you're really sort of taking a look at the persistence of those submenus, I'm going to open up one of those files. I'm just going to go ahead and open up admissions, which is one of the sections that does have a submenu. And when I go down into admissions, I want you to notice that not only does the link have a class of current, but the list item has a class of current as well. So as you're looking through those rules to try to determine how that menu persists when you're not browsing over it and how it goes away when you browse back over the nav bar, pay attention to that. That's a very important clue. Another thing is you go through the rules down here, and I'm just going to scroll down to show you where these drop-down rules are going to go. As I mentioned, around line 263, you're going to see that a lot of these rules are already kind of done for you. I've got a lot of the selectors already written and in place. And the reason for that is I really wanted you to focus on the three most important tasks for drop-down menus and the ones that are likely to be newest for you. Number one is overriding the default menu styles. Number two is properly positioning the submenus. And then finally, controlling the drop-down display. So those are the things I really want you to focus on, and that's particularly what your tasks are targeting. And as always, be sure to watch the Solutions movie once you finish to compare your finished menus with mine.